Hello and welcome to our webinar. While we let some few people join, if you could drop in the chat where you are coming from, we will just give it a couple minutes while people get in and we will get started very shortly. It looks like those numbers are starting to slow down, so I will get started and we'll let people join us as we go. So thank you everyone for joining the Concussion Legacy Foundation for our first webinar of this year's International CTE Awareness Month. So my name is Dr. Samantha Bureau. I am the Director of International Programs here at CLF. I'm currently based out of New Hampshire in the Northeast of the United States, and I do work closely with our team in the US. But I actually previously lived in Ottawa, Ontario. I am Canadian, and I have worked with CLF Canada in the past as well. In my current role, I oversee our global efforts promoting safer sports and working towards a future without chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a degenerative brain disease known as CTE. So if we reference CTE throughout the webinar, that is what we are talking about. So we are so proud to be an international organization. Our teams here in Canada, the UK, and Australia have all made great strides in expanding the global conversation, and we're really excited to talk about that this evening. And it will be morning if any of you are joining us here from Australia. We all support research that informs policy changes that will reduce CTE risk in sports for our youngest athletes. And fittingly, the topic for tonight's webinar has a worldwide focus. So we titled this webinar, New Fronts in the Fight Against CTE, where we'll be reporting cases from a variety of sports from Australia, Canada, the UK, and the US. Important to note that this is the first of 3 webinars that we'll be hosting during International CTE Awareness Month. So next Tuesday, we will take a closer look at the latest CTE research and efforts to diagnose disease in living patients. And then later this month, we will dedicate our final webinar to conversations about CTE in women, and I will be moderating that webinar as well. So here on your screen, you can either use the QR codes or click the links that are in the chat and you can register. Thanks to the renowned research by members of the CLF Global Brain Bank, we now know definitively that this disease is caused by repetitive head impacts. But more importantly, throughout CTE Awareness Month, we really want to highlight the fact that this disease is preventable and there is hope. And there are things that you can do to manage your symptoms and find community. For anyone here who may be concerned about suspected CTE or long-term concussion symptoms, the CLF helpline is here for you no matter where you live. So we have a dedicated helpline team in all the countries we operate in that can connect you with vetted providers who know what you're going through. And our patient services team also hosts regular meetings with a variety of CTE-focused support via Zoom. And we do have a one-on-one peer support connection program for those of you who are interested in more personalized connections. So I would encourage you to reach out to the CLF helpline. These incredible resources are free thanks to the generous donors and supporters of CLF. The link is in your chat for the CLF helpline. Next, one great way to support the CLF helpline and our CTE prevention efforts is to join the Race to End CTE, which will relaunch later this month. And this is an event that we are hosting in Australia, in Canada, and in the United States in a variety of capacities. This is a team-based fundraising competition, which we encourage supporters to share education about the disease with their families, their communities, workplaces, and alumni networks. And we inspire them to join the fight with the message that together we can end CTE. If you don't already, I would encourage you to also follow CLF on all of our social media as we expand these global conversations through International CTE Awareness Month. So we'll post the links to our pages in the chat now, but these are our handles that you see on your screen for our various profiles, and we will also include a link to our CTE Resources Facebook community that you're able to join if you wish. So tonight, our guests are from 4 countries and 3 different continents. And as you can imagine, it is sometimes difficult to coordinate time zones. So I'm very excited that we are able to do this for you tonight. It's extremely special to have everyone here with us. And we could not have accomplished any of this without the help of our supporters and wanting to bring this content. But first, I am going to be taking a few minutes to talk about some of the successes we've had across the globe in the past few years, and then we will jump into some interviews with our guests. So 2023 was a year of incredible growth. I feel like we've been saying this kind of over and over again. So I'm very proud of the work that we've been able to accomplish around the world. And again, we would not be where we are without the support of individuals like yourself and the support of our guests. So just a quick trot around the globe here. In Canada, we did see Rugby Canada announce the move towards a flag rugby model in children under 10. So this is a very positive movement and is encouraging as we continue to recommend non-contact sport versions for sports that are traditionally contact heavy, particularly in children under the age of 14 through our Stop Hitting Kids in the Head campaign. We also this past year launched and announced our 6th global brain bank site in Toronto with our partnership at the Canadian Concussion Centre. Moving over to the UK, we did see the FA trial of heading ban in children under the age of 12 and supporting increased awareness around concussion reporting practices in sports media. So our executive director in the UK, Nathan Howarth, was able and invited to train sports media professionals at the Community Shield event in 2023 and has since educated nearly 50 professionals, and we're excited for that number to continue to grow. In the US, we saw more landmark publications come from both the BU CTE Center and a really important collaborative paper, including one on rugby union, where researchers from the Unite Brain Bank in the US collaborated with researchers in Australia and the UK to examine the risk of developing CTE in rugby union. And later this evening, we will speak a bit more about rugby union. One landmark publication I do want to call special awareness to is a paper that was examining the odds of developing CTE based on the number of impacts and the total force of those impacts. And this paper actually inspired the development of the first CTE prevention protocol. We did host a separate webinar on this topic, and you can watch the replay if you wish. The link will be in the chat. And then finally, in Australia, we've seen outstanding support and media attention, particularly around sports-related brain trauma. So in 2023, there was a Senate inquiry on concussion and repeated brain trauma, and the recommendations that came from that inquiry included a national strategy on return to play protocols and a recommendation that those who have a history of repetitive head impacts donate their brain for research. Of note in that report, the committee also noted that the evidence that CTE is caused by repeated traumatic brain injuries was irrefutable, so a very big win in Australia. Our partners at the Australian Sports Brain Bank also announced the first case of CTE in a former female athlete, and we will be speaking about that later this month in our Women in CTE webinar. So to continue our discussion on the work going on in Australia, I'm honored to invite our first guest to the webinar, who joins us many hours ahead in Australia. It is Wednesday morning. So Andrew Mortimer is part of a legendary Australian rugby league family. 3 of his uncles played professionally, and 2 of them competed alongside his father, a former Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs captain, Steve Mortimer, who is considered by many the greatest player in club history. 3 Mortimer brothers competed in 4 grand finals together at a golden age for the club. But like too many former rugby league players, Steve Mortimer was diagnosed with early onset dementia in his early 60s, and at 67 now receives full-time care. We do know that some individuals who are diagnosed with dementia in life have also been diagnosed with CTE. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us to discuss the ongoing discussion and fight against CTE in Australia.
Thanks very much, Sam. It's great to be part of it, and yeah, looking forward to this.
Great. So first, I mean, your father played nearly 300 professional rugby league matches, most of them with Canterbury, but many others were representing a variety of teams. So how big was rugby league for the Mortimer family?
Yes, rugby league's probably in the top two codes in Australia. You've got AFL, predominantly out of Melbourne, and another number of other states. It's probably the biggest in terms of participation. Well, in terms of following. League's very big in New South Wales and Queensland. And so when Dad was playing primarily in the 80s, late 70s and 80s, it went through a real growth phase and very popular sport. It was still part-time. It was still not professional. So they all still did day jobs or nominal day jobs in some cases. But yeah, it was very big sport.
And then how would you describe Steve Mortimer, the player? Did anyone in your family have concerns during his career about brain injuries at all, or was that just really not on his radar?
I don't believe so. Obviously, I was quite young through Dad's career, so it wasn't top of mind for me at present. But Dad definitely got knocked out a lot throughout the course of his career. His position is halfback, which is, I guess, liking it to a quarterback in NFL. It's not a like-for-like comparison, but so he's sort of the organiser of play, and the nature of the way he played the game. He was quite unique and could do a lot of individual brilliant things to try and help his team. So he was a target. So he was a small bloke, leader, target, someone that the opposition wanted to try and help.
And you've spoken publicly about this, and your father did retire in 1988. And I mean, we've read that he maintained excellent physical shape after his playing days. I can only imagine the reaction of your family when you received the diagnosis of early onset dementia. So how did this impact your family, especially after seeing the ongoing research happening at the Australian Sports Brain Bank?
Sorry, can you just say that last part, Sam? I just got distracted as I was reading. Sorry, that last part of your question.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we're also wondering how the research coming out of the Australian Sports Brain Bank may have impacted your reaction to his diagnosis.
I think his diagnosis, so it was a shock to us. There was a lot of symptoms, or there was activity that there was things that Dad was doing that sort of led us to feel there was something wrong. So his diagnosis, I wouldn't say was too much of a shock, but the whole growth of the awareness of CTE and its potential link to dementia and those sort of things impacted us heavily. And hence why we're here and trying to be part of it.
And one final question. So across the world, and especially in Australia, as I alluded to, there really is a critical moment for contact sports and the institutions that are governing them. How have you seen that conversation in Australia shift, and what would you like to see as that next step?
I think it's shifted where it's now very prominent that this is a growing issue. And if you go back maybe only a year or two or three, it was very much not so much a sweep it under the carpet, but maybe not treated with the respect it deserves. That's definitely shifting now, which is great. I think, and I sort of come at this both as a son, and as a family member of someone who suffered from it or potentially suffering from it, but also as a passionate, league man myself and a coach, father, all that sort of stuff, and former lower grade player. So for me, I want to see the game thrive. And I think it's inevitable that these initiatives around tackle and non-contact, or at least, mitigating as much contact to their head in young ages, I think that's great. The game's just got to adapt. And part of the, I guess, conflict is our game, as others are, is very gladiatorial and very combative, and there is a lot of contact and impact. So we've just got to find a way that we can maintain that and maintain the DNA of the sport without compromising injuries.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for joining us, especially during your workday. We know that yourself and all those a part of CLF Australia will continue to fight relentlessly to end CTE and also make the sports that we love safer. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much, Sam. I'll stick around for a little bit. I appreciate the opportunity to be involved.
Of course. So next, we will take the conversation to a sport and a country that is both very near and dear to my heart, ice hockey in Canada. So Janice Roster joins our panel from Alberta. She is the sister of Todd Gillingham, a former hockey player who was diagnosed with stage 3 CTE by researchers at the Unite Brain Bank following his passing in January 2023 at the age of 52. In her brother's memory, Janice did co-write Todd's legacy story, which you can find on the CLF website. We will put that link in the chat today just so you can read it further. So Janice, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So growing up in Newfoundland, Todd was a standout athlete with size and skill, which is sometimes rare in the hockey field. But that led him to the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, which it really is home to Canada's some, top hockey prospects. Although despite he had, very good scoring abilities, he was really slotted into kind of like a more physical presence on the ice. So what do you remember about his playing style, particularly during his junior hockey days?
He was always a big kid, so when he was on the ice, he was well recognized. He was definitely willing to take a hit, and he was willing to give one, but never aggressive or unsportsmanlike. He played fairly. He wasn't unsportsmanlike or anything. His friend did contact us just after he passed and said that he remembered in the Quebec League that multiple times where they'd get hit or checked or whatever, and they'd come off the ice dizzy or whatnot, and they'd be given the Tylenol or Advil and told them they were okay and get back out there. So he said like his friend never remembered them really doing a concussion protocol, whereas I guess now they do it more frequently and everything. But back then it was just never recognized or acknowledged. So the kids were just sent back out to play, and they trusted the coaches and management to do that.
And on that note, he was diagnosed with more than 30 concussions, but he did feel that the actual number was much higher, correct? And,
Yeah.
Clearly not properly managed. And, after, he turned around 31 and called a career to focus being on a father, you've noticed that that was really the time he started exhibiting changes. So what can you say about those few years after he retired and how he was doing?
I think initially we all thought it was just adjusting to life after hockey and for the lack of a better word, slotting back into a normal average life. But then he started to have headaches more. Loud noises were not, where he found that distracting and, gave him a headache and couldn't handle it. He started to withdraw a bit more. He was quieter. He was always kind of silly and not outspoken, but he wasn't shy by any means. And he could walk into a crowd and settle in. He didn't go out as much. He preferred to stay home. He was more emotional when he talked about things. If it upset him, he was, definitely showed his emotions more. Never really aggressive or anything, but just more emotional in general. And then he complained a lot about headaches. In the end, he would say his head hurt, or he would sit most days and rub his head and stuff. So there were definitely signs, but in the beginning, we just thought it was, trying to figure out life after hockey.
Of course. And then, in your story, you talk about how he did travel to California to try and find some answers to what he was going through and underwent some scans among his search. So what did you learn from the doctors at that time, and how did he react to those findings in particular?
Once he had the scans and all the results, he was told he had 5, he called them black spots on his brain. And he felt that confirmed what he had suspected, that he had TBI and possibly CTE. He would watch, like if he saw shows on TV, let us know about CTE, what the, it was, like, I don't know, not marketplace, but one of those informative documentary shows. And he read a lot of books about other people that were suffering from CTE, that had CTE or suspected they did. He confided a bit in us in that one day he did talk about suicide, and he didn't know how he was going to go on with, his brain. He couldn't work anymore. So he pretty much just sat every day and he read and watched sports, tried to do crossword puzzles and stuff, but he really withdrew. Yeah, he talked about suicide, but didn't think he was strong enough to do it, to commit suicide. He started to question whether he was a good person, reflecting on his decisions in life and second guessing things that he did. He also said, if he ever had known that this is what would have happened to him in the end, he would never have played the sport, or would have stopped at some point to save his brain. So he definitely felt that the sport in the end was what caused all this brain trauma and everything.
And ultimately, we know that, the brain was donated. What do you think he had hoped would come from his contribution to this research and, to provide answers to you and your family as well?
He wanted to confirm that his thoughts were true, that he did have CTE, and that could explain some of the behavioral changes that he was going through. I think he never wanted to disappoint anybody, and I think by knowing what happened to him, would let others know that even though he changed, it wasn't because he wanted to become that person. He also hoped that the CTE research could help other people who are living with, I know you don't know about CTE, but people know when they're not right or have brain trauma or whatnot. So he was hoping that would help people who are still living with TBI and somehow make their lives a bit more comfortable and be able to function more in society.
And there's a really beautiful line in Todd's legacy story, and I really do encourage anyone who's here with us, go and read it. But it says, ironically, Todd gave everything to the sport he loved, but the sport did not return the favor. So with that in mind, what changes do you hope to see from hockey decision makers as research reveals more about its links to CTE and some of the other long-term consequences?
So I think right now, Minor Hockey Canada, there's no checking under 15, which means you're allowed to check at 13. And if we know that the brain is not developed until a certain age, then he didn't really understand why you were allowed to possibly do damage before you're fully developed. He also frequently talked about Gary Bettman at the professional level, the commissioner of hockey, who clearly science shows that hockey does cause you get concussions, which causes CTE. And I think just acknowledgement by the NHL would be huge. And it would also inform parents that it's real and let them actually have a knowledge of it and not just hearsay. Because in Canada, hockey is like religion, and parents believe whatever NHL or hockey says. So being honest with parents and athletes, I think, would go a long way, and less players would suffer from the trauma. And we just hope that the research continues and people living with TBI can live more comfortably, because a lot of these players, if they're not elite hockey players in the NHL, then they're not making the money that the NHL players are making. So when they finish, they're in their 30s and they're starting from scratch, and they don't have the money for therapy or medicines that might help relieve the stress and the pain that they're going through. And they really don't have, I know they can turn to CLF and everything, but some of them, you know, it's hard to do that. So it's, yeah, I think a more aggressive approach to minor hockey probably would, maybe when kids register for contact sports in their registration package, there could be some kind of little slip of paper giving them exposure to CLF and concussion research and possible lifetime trauma from concussions.
Well, thank you, Janice, for sharing Todd's story and joining us tonight. I know this is not easy, especially being, you know, so recent for you. And I just want to express that CLF Canada, our partners around the world, our entire research team and staff, we're here for you. We feel for you, and we're really thankful that you could be here with us.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for everything you do.
We will continue to discuss the new fronts on the fights against CTE, and we will now cross the Atlantic to the UK to discuss rugby union. But before we jump into Connor's intro, we do have a special video to share with everyone here on the webinar. So we will have our tech team tee that up.
Hi, my name is Connor, I'm 26 and in 12 weeks I'll be taking part in an 8-hour ultramarathon. Prior to this, the furthest I've run is a half marathon. So why have I decided to do this? I'm doing this to help raise awareness for the Concussion Legacy Foundation and to help them fight for a world without CTE. My goal is to run 60 kilometres within the 8 hours. For every kilometre I do not complete, I will donate £50. Over the next 12 weeks, I'll be documenting my training and sharing information on the Concussion Legacy Foundation and CTE. Any support would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Well, what a great way to kick off our next guest. So our next guest is Connor Turner, who was in that video. He is joining us from Manchester, UK. And as he had mentioned in his video, currently training for the Ultra Looped, which is a timed event on a 5-kilometer course. And participants cover as much distance as they can within that 8 hours. So again, his goal is 60 kilometers. So as he trains for the event on March 23rd, he is raising money for CLF, and he will be documenting his journey as he noted. So we will put the links in the chat if anyone wants to follow along with his journey. But he was doing so to honor his father, Richard Turner, who is currently suffering from symptoms of CTE. Connor, thank you so much for staying up late and joining us from England.
It's a pleasure and thank you for having me.
Of course. So, you know, most people in North America do think football and, you know, think American football, but, you know, and soccer in the UK. So when they hear about Manchester specifically, they really think about soccer, right? Or football, as you would say. But for your dad, it's really been rugby union, right? That's been the sport. And you've told us in the past that he started playing at age 5. So if you could tell us a bit more about his lifelong love for the sport, we would love to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. So with my dad, he's always had a passion for the sport, but rugby was more of an obsession to him. It's been more than just a sport. It's more about the team. It's the competitive spirit within the sport. And for my dad, it's a way to kind of alleviate stress and frustration from himself. But throughout my dad's career, he's suffered from multiple concussions. I can remember there was actually one time I must have been about 16. He's been tackled, severe concussion, been taken off the pitch, as you do, obviously not really aware of concussions and everything like that. So just magic sponge on, straight back on the pitch, and I could just see him just running in, and he was actually throwing up. But yet still carried on and played the game, which in his head he thought it was smart and everyone all like cheered him on, but obviously not the best idea. But up and even till last year, my dad has still been playing some sort of rugby. We've actually found something called Masters Rugby, which is kind of where you wear different types of shorts depending on your age. For example, yellow shorts, ages 50 to 60, it's only touch, not full contact, which means you can still kind of play the sport, but obviously still reducing chances of more repetitive hits to the head.
Yeah, what a great way to stay involved in a sport and really reduce your risk. You know, in recent years, you have noticed some changes in your dad, and, you know, really do believe that those are from those decades of hits to the head that he sustained. So how would you really describe his struggles, and what made you want to raise awareness about him and other former athletes that may be going through something similar?
Yeah, absolutely. And so this has been going on for quite a few years now. And in the beginning, the symptoms weren't that noticeable. Bit of loss of balance, headaches. Over and over the years, the symptoms have increased, and today the symptoms impact my dad's life quite drastically. He's been running a business for the past 10 years, but now he can't actually drive, so he can't go to site. He suffers from memory loss quite drastically. So trying to remember day-to-day stuff or conversations he's had or quotes he's been doing, kind of just get forgetting about, which causes more stress and pressure on him, which makes work a hell of a lot harder. And he has quite a lot of seizures, which means sometimes if you leave him for a few hours, or you kind of get a bit daunted leaving him, because if he has a seizure, he ends up hitting his head. Another concussion, but also it can be quite severe. And we've found him in sites in the kitchen where he's just covered in blood and kind of still concussed and completely out of it, which is, it's not nice to see. And what's kind of made me want to raise awareness for this, but before realistically last 2 years, I've never heard of anything other than CTE, and it just needs to be spoken more about it. And obviously finding the team about CLF, which has helped me out so much and my family so much, having that support from Nathan, which has been phenomenal. But people really need to be educated on the risks due to repetitive hits to the head.
Yeah, and since you did bring up your work with Nathan, we'll get into our kind of scheduled questions after, but I'm wondering, since we have been talking about the CLF helpline this evening, if you could just share with the audience what working with the CLF helpline has meant to you and how that has helped your family.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been quite a tough few years, and my dad's been diagnosed with atypical PSP, Parkinson's, MS, until recently he started actually finding out, obviously, it was suspected CTE. And obviously working with the CLF, it's been countless of supports, and I didn't really have much hope before then. And with my dad, he's been suffering quite aggressively with mental health, not suicidal to say, but has them thoughts quite frequently now. And I was on YouTube one time and came across trying to find as much information as I could about CTE, because even some doctors I've spoken to didn't know what CTE was, which kind of made it more frustrating in my eyes. But found a podcast of Chris Nowinski, TED Talk, sorry, and yeah, kind of just opened it up, and a little light bulb clicked in my head, and reached straight out to him on LinkedIn, and he set me up with Nathan. And ever since then, that's been the last 5 months, and it's been so supportive for myself, and I can't really thank you all enough for that.
Of course, yeah, we're so happy that you're able to find us. And I mean, hope is really so important. And, knowing what you're going through and how things have changed for you, what gives you hope for families like yours and for other athletes? Like, what is that guiding light for you?
I think it's just more and more people are talking about CTE, even on podcasts. Like I was watching Joe Rogan, The Rock was on, and they started talking about CTE. I've never seen that, especially in the UK. You don't hear anything about CTE that much. So just hearing people more talking about it globally is giving me more hope, because more people that talk about it, the more funding, the more awareness. And also it means sports might be adapted to play in a safer way so they can thrive and played in longevity.
And, Connor, we did share your video, and we have been talking about how you'll be raising money for CLF and really taking on an ambitious goal. So where can we follow your journeys as you raise awareness and train?
Yeah, absolutely. So my Instagram and TikTok is at C Turner with an extra R at the end _. And in both my bios, there's a link tree which has a donation page and my Strava and everything else like that.
Great. So we will include those in the chat. So anyone who is interested in following Connor for his race, he can do so. And we will continue to share your videos around in case you are also following the CLF social accounts. So Connor, I cannot thank you enough for staying up late and joining us here tonight. I mean, your initials, how fitting, CT versus CTE. We are following you along. We're with you every step of the way. And thank you for helping us raise much needed awareness in the UK.
Thank you very much. And like I said, I can't thank you and CLF for all the support I've had so far, but really appreciate it.
Of course. So we are coming to our final guest, and we will bring things home to the United States, where we will have our last guest joining us from the Rocky Mountains, just outside of Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Suzanne Holm is the mother of legacy donor Zachary Holm, a former college football player who struggles with depression, gave him concerns about CTE. Zach did pass away in 2021 from a deadly interaction between cold medication and antidepressants. Suzanne and Greg, they decided to donate their son's brain to the Unite Brain Bank, where researchers later diagnosed him with stage 2 CTE. Suzanne has also shared Zach's legacy story for the CLF website, so we will put that in the chat so you can read about it. Suzanne, thank you so much for joining us and helping us discuss how we can fight the battle against CTE.
Thank you for inviting me.
So could you share some background about Zach's football experience and when he started to worry about the effects of the sport, what it may have had done to his brain?
Zach was born in Tampa, Florida, and for those who may not know it, the South in the United States is really known for creating football players and cultivating football players. Zach was a very large kid. He weighed 99 pounds when he was 8 years old. He actually started playing tackle football at 7 years old, and he was very, very intense about playing. He loved to play football. He played every position on the field, and started playing quarterback at age 10, but also played linebacker. So he was receiving hits, but also giving hits. And you can imagine all of the subconcussive hits he took through his lifetime of playing football for 12 years. It was his senior year in high school that he came to me and he said, Mom, I think I've got ADD, attention deficit disorder. And I said, well, I really don't see that in you, but we can have you evaluated by a psychiatric professional. And his girlfriend at the time was telling me that he had really a hard time with high-pitched noises and was having depression symptoms, which he had hidden pretty well. So he was 18 when he asked me that question. He was on his way to University of Wyoming to play football. When he was there, the first paper that he wrote was on CTE. Zach had researched head injuries related to football because he was starting to think that something was seriously wrong when he was so he died at age 23. I would say probably at age 22, he said, Mom, I really think that my brain is broken. He was suffering from severe depression. I am a nurse practitioner, so I had the ability to take him to many different specialists, and they basically were treating him for depression. And the last psychiatrist that he saw was very honest with him, and Zach really appreciated it. Zach, the specialist, said, Buddy, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but you've got treatment-resistant depression. And Zach said, Mom, I'm pretty sure I have CTE. And I said, well, Zach, that's a diagnosis made at autopsy. And he said, I know, Mom, but I just wanted to let you know I've done research, and none of the medication that I'm taking really helps me for very long.
And in fact, he was diagnosed with CTE, and Dr. McKee had noted that the extent of the damage was unexpected for someone his age, and that there were multiple lesions in the parts of the brain responsible for mood and impulsivity. So how did your family take to this revelation, especially with your medical background?
I was actually very relieved. It took 10 months to get the answer, and I was really preparing myself for what I would hear, and hearing that he did have the brain damage that he was experiencing, he was feeling, actually was a relief, because we really tried everything, and I had a lot. I had a lot of resources to my advantage, and nothing really helped him. So hearing that his brain was damaged was devastating, but at the same time, it really helped to have an answer.
And his brain was, in fact, included in a very large study done by Boston University researchers last year, which looked at brains of former contact sport athletes who died before the age of 30. And many people may have read about this in the New York Times or elsewhere. But for a lot of people, it really was their first understanding that young people, not just former NFL players or professional athletes, were developing CTE. So we are seeing that there are many young athletes like Zach who are struggling. What message do you take from studies like these and how Zach is able to, continue his legacy?
What I took from it was getting the, I would say, the shock factor out to the world, that this is not a disease that's just affecting older athletes, whether they be boxers, rugby players, hockey players, etc. It is something that we now know we should be changing the way we let our kids play sports that involve repetitive head injuries. I noticed that when I talk about my 23-year-old son dying from CTE, it gets a completely different reaction than when they hear about a football player, American football player, dying at age 77. So I really appreciate being part of the Concussion Legacy Foundation family, if you will. I believe that it is a way to get the word out. It has brought us a lot of peace. There's a lot of support, and we're hoping that we can change the way they produce football players.
And we know that February is International CTE Awareness Month. And although most of the research to date has focused on American football players, we've talked about stories tonight from other sports. We've talked about some of the findings in other countries. So what does this mean to you specifically as you see this awareness spread around the world, knowing that, the work that your son has contributed to is really sparking change all over the globe?
It's very comforting. Zach would be very, very proud to be part of this research. Thank goodness he schooled me on CTE, because I am a primary care provider, so I don't have any background with CTE. I'm so thankful he and I talked about it. We had a very close relationship, so we talked about all of his struggles, and it lets me know, seeing the international stories, it lets me know that CTE does not discriminate. CTE is a threat, a risk for all sports in all countries. And I'm very excited that we are part of a program that can make changes.
Well, thank you, Suzanne, for being here again. We are so sorry for your family's loss. You've said before to me and to a few people on our team that you believe somewhere Zach knows his brain donation has made a difference, and he certainly has. So thank you again for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
So we do have a few extra minutes. So what I will do is take a moment to answer a few of the questions that have popped up in our Q&A box before we wrap. And I am seeing some questions around the exposures that people may suffer who have been diagnosed with CTE. And of course, we are talking about CTE in the context of athletics right now, but this does not mean that these individuals have not suffered TBIs from just day-to-day activities, motor vehicle accidents, other areas. And we've seen cases of CTE in the literature from individuals who've had, head banging behavior, very frequent falls. Again, most cases of CTE that are reported, we do have a very strong sense that these individuals have suffered, thousands or tens of thousands of impacts over the course of their career. But sport is certainly not the only risk factor here. Aiden, I see you do have a question about World Rugby and trialing the new lower tackling laws and the upgrading potential flower play to red cards. So we are always looking for ways to encourage sports to reduce risk. And we know now from papers that were released in 2023 that it's both the total number of impacts, but also the force of those impacts that are contributing to CTE. And again, we did host a webinar on this paper and the CTE prevention protocol that we're happy to share with the group if you want to go back and learn more. So anything that we can do to reduce the overall risk and burden is a move in the right direction. And as I mentioned previously, in Canada, they are moving towards a flag rugby model for children under the age of 10. So this is a great move. Of course, we would like to see continued action in this way so that we can reduce the number of impacts our children are taking. But things like flag rugby are another great opportunity to reduce that overall burden that young players may be sustaining. So we are hopeful that groups around the world will continue to move in the right direction. We are continuing to look at a variety of sources of exposure for CTE. I see there are some questions in the chat and in the Q&A box about, if we're looking at motocross or other extreme sports. And while you can imagine the research does take some time, we do have such a great foundation with American football that, our partners in the United States and around the world are also able to look at a variety of different exposures. And there will be a few new studies launching this year and the following year where we are excited to announce that we'll be looking at a wider age range of individuals and more exposure types. So if you are not on our research registry, I would recommend you sign up if you have an interest in participating in clinical research. We also need people who have had no exposure to head impacts so we can have controls in our research, but that is something we're excited to continue supporting. I see that there are some questions here about Congress and government, and things move differently in different countries. We are seeing Australia is probably a really good example of how things can move very quickly when a lot of people come to the table and move in the right direction, in the same direction. So we're really excited to see the movement coming out of Australia. Here in Canada and the US, we're also always trying to support this work in any way that we can. And we are hopeful that there will be more, whether it's legislation or awareness, anything that can be done at a national scale to help with this issue. In Canada, one of the things that happened early in CLF Canada's history was the Rowan's Law legislation, which was actually the first concussion legislation in Canada, and right now the only concussion legislation. So although not CTE specifically, we are excited to see governments really taking charge and understanding this issue is important, which makes the Senate inquiry that occurred this past year in 2023, in Australia, so important. And the last thing I want to answer, because I know there are so many more questions coming in, is around what we can do to be supportive. So thank you, Melinda, for asking this question. We do see a lot of the times that the outcomes for CTE can be negative, especially for those who experience it and their families. And there is a lot that you can do to help, whether or not you or a loved one is experiencing any negative outcomes. You can share our messages. You can follow us on social. You can subscribe to our newsletter to see what we are up to and really spread the word in your communities. It's so important that we continue to talk about CTE and, again, spread that awareness around hope. I think Connor's experience and what he was talking about with his dad is really a great way to exemplify how even when things get tough, there is still hope. There are things that we can do to help people and help families, and that is what our CLF helpline is here for. And within our programs at the CLF helpline, we do have that peer support connection program where we need volunteers. So if you are someone who has been through it, who knows what's going on, we would love to have you join us as a volunteer. So with that, I would like to thank our guests for joining us again today to discuss what they have gone through and what they are currently going through. We are so grateful to have you in our community and for joining us here. I know this is probably not a convenient time for any of you right now on the call, which makes me appreciate it so much more. And again, if someone or yourself or someone you love is currently struggling with the symptoms of suspected CTE, we are here for you. We've talked about the helpline a few times today, but please reach out to our helpline if you need help. The link is in the chat. The URL is here on the screen. Our team is excellent. And again, we do have responders in Canada, the US, Australia, and the UK, so we can help everyone in those demographics and beyond. If you are looking to connect with someone with that shared experience, We would also encourage you to join our support groups for suspected CTE patients and caregivers. And again, bringing up that one-on-one program. If you are looking for, more personalized care and connection, we welcome you to join that program, whether it be as a volunteer or as a participant. And finally, we have developed a CTE caregiver guidebook. We did release this the previous CTE Awareness Month, and this is really a comprehensive book that we've put together to provide you with resources for you and your loved ones. If anyone could benefit from the resource, we will put either a link or the file in the chat now so that you can download it. It is on our website if you want to reference it at a later time. And then finally, we are able to put on events like this for free through your support. If you found that this event has been helpful and you want to pay it forward by making a donation to CLF or of any amount, we will help us continue to create more resources for our community. We are going to add a donation link in the chat right now. Thank you for joining us. We do hope to see you at our next webinar in a week. And good evening to those here in North America and in the UK, and have a great afternoon and late morning to those in Australia.